The crystal sparkled under the chandelier as I sat across from my parents at their long oak table. It was the kind of setting they thrived in, formal controlled, everything polished until it shone. My mother Evelyn poured another glass of wine as my father Raymond slid a thick envelope across the table. "Allison," he said smoothly, "this is about security for you, for all of us." I rested my hands in my lap, steadying my breath. The envelope lay between us like a challenge. My mother smiled as though she were offering me dessert. "It's just a formality. One family, one future." I pulled the papers free, scanning the first page. The words blurred for a moment, but the intent was clear. Every account, every investment, every property I had built was to be placed into a family trust managed solely by them. My father nudged a pen closer. "This way we all move forward together. No more silos, no more risk." Inside, something coiled tight. They weren't just asking. They were demanding everything I had spent my adult life creating. I looked up slowly, catching the faint triumph in their eyes, the expectation that I would fold out of duty or guilt or both. Instead, I let my lips curve into a calm smile. "If this is truly about trust, then you won't mind what I've prepared." For the first time that evening, their expressions faltered. My mother's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. My father's jaw flexed. At that precise moment, the butler stepped into the dining room, his voice formal but edged with tension. "Ma'am," he said, "your lawyer is here." I leaned back in my chair, heart steady. The real conversation was about to begin. When Laura's heels clicked against the floor behind me, I felt the weight of my parents' stares sharpen. But before the first word left her mouth, my mind pulled me back to the years that had carried me here. The years when I learned no one was coming to save me. In my early 20s, Seattle was shifting neighborhoods, gentrifying faster than anyone could keep up. I saw it as opportunity. While friends spent their weekends at bars, I was crouched on the floors of rundown kitchens, stripping tiles, painting cabinets, and coaxing life back into homes most people wouldn't glance at twice. My hands blistered, my back ached, but I kept going. I reinvested every dollar I made, flipping one house into the down payment for another. At 25, I signed the papers on my first Victorian duplex. Holding the keys felt like holding proof that discipline mattered more than pedigree. Still, when I showed my parents, their reaction was a dismissive laugh. "You were lucky the market turned," my mother said. "Without us, you'd never manage," my father added. Their words stung, but not more than the memory I carried from college the day I asked them to co-sign my student loan. They refused, claiming it would teach me responsibility. It did, though not in the way they intended. I worked double shifts, skipped meals, lived in a cramped basement apartment with mold on the walls. Their refusal cut me, but it also forged me. Over time, the duplex became 3 properties, then 5. I learned to negotiate, to anticipate market turns, to stand firm when contractors tried to talk down to me. Each decision, each closing, each mortgage paid off was my own doing. My parents never lifted a finger, yet they acted as though my success reflected on them. Now, as I sat in their dining room, contract heavy in my hands, I realized their neglect had given me the very independence they despised, and I knew it was that independence they were trying so hard to strip away. Looking back, I realized the contract at the dinner table wasn't born out of thin air. My parents had been testing the waters for years, softening me with little jabs disguised as family wisdom. "You should merge finances," my mother once said over coffee, her tone deceptively casual. "Family must stick together. What's the point of keeping things separate if we're all working toward the same future?" My father preferred guilt as his weapon. "After all we sacrificed for you, don't we deserve to feel secure? Money should circulate within the family, not sit idle in your accounts." At the time, I brushed their comments aside. I told myself it was just their way of holding on, of trying to stay relevant in a world that was quickly moving past them. Still, their words always left a sting, like a faint burn I couldn't quite soothe. One afternoon, I came home early from a showing and found my father in my apartment. The lease had my name alone. The locks were new. Yet there he was, rifling through the drawer where I kept property deeds and bank statements. He looked up startled before recovering with a stiff smile. "Just curious," he said, as if curiosity gave him a right to my life. I forced a laugh, told myself he was old-fashioned, raised in an era where a father felt entitled to his child's papers. But when he left, I noticed the envelope holding my latest closing statement was half out of place, like a page had been thumbed too far. For a while, I convinced myself it was nothing. Parents worry, parents pry, parents cross boundaries out of love. But deep down, a small voice began to whisper that it wasn't love at all. It was entitlement. That voice grew louder each time they brought up unity and legacy until it was impossible to ignore. And by the time the contract appeared on the dinner table, I knew that whisper had been right all along. Laura's arrival was as sharp as a blade slicing through silk. She stepped into the dining room with her briefcase in hand, her eyes cool, assessing the scene before her. My parents stiffened in unison as though they hadn't expected me to arrive with armor. "Good evening," Laura said smoothly, setting her case on the edge of the table. "I understand there's a contract my client is supposed to sign." Evelyn's smile cracked. "This is a private family matter. There's no need for lawyers." Laura ignored her, sliding the papers from the envelope. She flipped through them quickly, her brow arching higher with each page. Then came the smirk. "Wow," she murmured, closing the folder with a snap. "This isn't a trust. It's a complete transfer of authority. If Allison signed this, you'd have unilateral control over her assets. Every dollar, every property, every account." The silence that followed was suffocating. My father recovered first. "It's about trust, Laura. About protecting our family from risk." His voice was calm, but the muscle in his jaw betrayed him. "Interesting," Laura replied evenly. "Because what I see is a document where Allison loses every right to her own money." "If it's really about trust, why is she the only one who surrenders anything?" My mother leaned forward, her tone syrupy sweet. "You know us, Allison. We'd never hurt you. This is just a formality." I sat back, my hands folded neatly in my lap. The contract lay on the table between us, a symbol of everything they thought they could demand. I could feel their eyes pressing against me, willing me to break, to cave, to sign. Instead, I looked directly at them and let my voice cut through the air like glass. "We're finished here tonight." For the first time in my life, I saw something rare in my parents' expressions. Not control, not confidence, but fear. It flickered across their faces before they masked it. But I caught it, and it settled into me like a promise. I pushed my chair back, steady and deliberate, already knowing they wouldn't let this end so easily. I had barely risen from my chair when my father's voice cut through the air. "Sit down, Allison. You're not thinking clearly." My mother's hand fluttered toward the untouched wine glass in front of me. "There's something you need to hear first," she said, her tone softer than I'd heard it all evening. "Something that changes everything." Against my better judgment, I eased back into my seat. Laura stood behind me, arms crossed, her presence a steady anchor. My father steepled his fingers and fixed me with a measured stare. "The Harper estate in Maine," he began, "has been tied up in probate for years, but the process is nearing its end. We're poised to regain full control of the property and its assets. It's worth more than you can imagine." Evelyn leaned in, her smile sharp but dressed in warmth. "And of course you are our daughter. You stand to benefit as much as we do, but unity is essential. Probate courts value stability. Families that fracture well, let's just say judges don't look kindly on chaos." The implication was unmistakable. "Sign the contract, prove my loyalty, and I'd be welcomed into the circle of inheritance. Refuse, and I'd be cast out." For a moment, I let them talk, their words dripping like honey over poison. They painted the estate as a fortress of history and legacy, something that was rightfully mine if only I'd surrender my independence. But beneath the varnish, I saw the truth. The Maine estate wasn't a gift. It was a leash. They wanted me tethered, bound not just by blood but by paper and pen. My wealth had become their bargaining chip, and the so-called inheritance was the bait. I glanced at Laura. She didn't speak, but her eyes told me she understood. This wasn't about legacy. It was about control. My father's glare hardened, a storm gathering behind his calm facade. "Without us," he said flatly, "you'll lose everything." I straightened my spine, steadying my breath. The irony nearly made me laugh. They had given me nothing, yet now they threatened to take it all. Laura placed a hand on my shoulder, a silent reminder that we weren't finished. And I knew then that the only way forward was not just to defend what I had built, but to uncover just how deep their desperation ran. After that dinner, I knew talk would get me nowhere. My parents weren't negotiating, they were cornering. So the very next morning, I hired a private investigator. His name was Ethan Caldwell, a man with a reputation for finding truths people went to great lengths to bury. He worked quickly. Within a week, he placed a thick file on Laura's desk and we went through it together. Each page was a window into the life my parents had been hiding. The main estate they had dangled in front of me, it was mortgaged to the hilt collateral for loans they had taken out over the last decade. The grand image of wealth they paraded antique furnishings charitable galas curated elegance was a mirage. Behind it lay years of reckless spending patched together by desperate borrowing. But the worst blow came near the end of the file, an application for a new credit line bearing my name. My signature had been forged, but it was careful someone who had watched me sign documents countless times. I stared at the page until the lines blurred rage and disbelief clawing at me. I thought about the little passbook savings account they opened for me when I was a child. I remembered my father lifting me up to the teller's counter, telling me I was learning responsibility. Back then, I believed them. Now, looking at the forged document, I realized they weren't teaching me responsibility at all. They were teaching themselves access. Laura's voice broke through my haze. This isn't just manipulation, Allison. It's fraud and it's criminal. The betrayal felt heavier than the paper in my hands. These were the people who raised me, who claimed to know what was best for me. Now they were stealing not just from my accounts, but from the very identity I had built without them. I set the file down and forced my hands to unclench. If they had crossed this line, there was no telling how far they were willing to go. And I knew the next step was to confront not just their debts, but the twisted logic that justified it all. The forged credit line haunted me long after I left Laura's office. It wasn't just the act itself, it was what it revealed. Late that night, lying awake, my mind wandered back to memories I had never questioned until now. When I was 10, I begged for piano lessons. My parents refused telling me I needed to learn discipline without indulgence. When I asked for help with college applications, they brushed me off with a lecture about independence. And when I pleaded for a co-signature on my first loan, they refused again, claiming it was tough love. For years, I carried those moments like badges of resilience proof that I could weather anything without their support. But looking back now, I saw them for what they were: rehearsals. They weren't teaching me independence. They were conditioning me to accept abandonment to normalize neglect, so that when exploitation came later, I might confuse it with love. The thought made me sick. Still, guilt slithered in whispering that I was being unfair. After all, hadn't they given me a roof, meals, clothes? Wasn't I ungrateful for rejecting the people who raised me? I voiced this once to Laura, and she leaned forward, eyes steady on mine. Protecting yourself isn't betrayal, Allison. Betrayal already happened to you. Don't mistake survival for selfishness. Her words settled into me like stone, solid and undeniable. The weight of years lifted, replaced by something harder, sharper. I wasn't the child they'd tried to mold anymore. I wasn't someone who would bend out of guilt or fold under obligation. By the time I left her office that evening, my resolve was clear. My parents had rewritten my childhood into a story of sacrifice and obedience. Now it was my turn to rewrite the ending, and I knew exactly where the confrontation had to begin. Laura wasted no time. After the forged credit line surfaced, she brought in a forensic accountant. She trusted a quiet man named Victor, who had a talent for tracing money through shadows. Within days, he uncovered what I suspected, but hadn't been able to prove a hidden offshore account in my parents' names. The statements were staggering transfers from shell companies' loans, stacked on loans and debts rolled over like dice on a rigged table. They had been juggling liabilities for years, using the illusion of wealth to buy more time. The truth was plain: without an infusion of cash, their empire was already crumbling, and the lifeline they had chosen was me. Laura's office became a war room. She assembled the evidence into a clean, devastating file fraud attempted forgery coercion, each section airtight. Each page a nail in the coffin of their performance as noble benefactors. But I knew facts alone wouldn't be enough. My parents thrived on narrative, on turning guilt into currency, so I added something they couldn't dismiss as technical memory turned tangible. Years ago, my grandmother's necklace and my grandfather's watch had disappeared from the family safe. My parents told me they were being appraised. I accepted the explanation back then. But part of me always knew better. Now, tucked into Victor's report, I placed the pawn shop receipts Laura had tracked down, proof they had sold our heirlooms for quick cash. Proof their theft reached back not just into my adulthood, but into the very legacy they claimed to protect. When I looked at the growing pile of documents, I felt no satisfaction, only clarity. They had built a tower of lies so tall it was bound to collapse. All I needed to do was give it the right push, and for that there was only one place left to deliver the blow back at their own dinner table. The next invitation arrived in the same gilded envelope as always, thick with pretense. My parents thought I would come alone, but I walked into their dining room with Laura at my side. The table was set with crystal and silver, but beneath the gleam I could feel the tension pressing like humidity before a storm. Raymond greeted me with his familiar air of command. "We trust you've reconsidered," he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. Evelyn's smile was brittle, her eyes shining with the confidence of someone convinced victory was inevitable. I sat, but instead of opening the folder they had prepared for me, Laura placed our own files squarely in the center of the table. She flipped it open with deliberate calm. Offshore accounts, forged signatures, pawned heirlooms, and debts stacked so high the estate is a hollow shell. The color drained from my mother's face. She reached across the table, her voice breaking. "Allison, this isn't what it looks like." "We only wanted to protect the family, to protect you." My father's composure cracked in a different direction. His fist slammed the armrest, rattling the silverware. "This is betrayal. After all we've done, you dare to side with outsiders against us." I met his fury with steady eyes. "Family doesn't mean ownership. You've mistaken me for your rescue fund. I won't be the solution to debts you created." Evelyn's pleas dissolved into sobs while Raymond's glare cut across the room like a blade, but neither had time to recover. The sound of sirens filtered through the tall windows, growing louder until red and blue lights strobed against the glass. Laura closed the file and leaned back as footsteps echoed in the hall. The knock at the door was sharp, final. I watched as the officers entered, my parents' faces collapsing under the weight of exposure, and in that moment I understood there was no turning back. The weeks that followed moved quickly. News of the investigation spread, and with it the collapse of the illusion my parents had built. The main estate, once their proudest boast, was pulled into foreclosure. Creditors lined up at every door, stripping away what little remained of their borrowed grandeur. I watched from a distance, not with glee, but with a clarity I had never felt before. Their downfall wasn't mine to mourn. It was theirs to own. Meanwhile, I tightened the guard around my own life. Every property deed, every account statement, every safeguard I had prepared was secured in a fireproof safe. I changed locks, updated passwords, left nothing vulnerable. For the first time, my future felt entirely mine, untouched by guilt or expectation. One evening, I sat across from Laura at a quiet wine bar between us, no contracts, no files, just 2 glasses and the steady hum of relief. She raised hers with a small smile. "To freedom hard-earned," she said. I clinked my glass against hers, the sound sharp, decisive. "To freedom," I echoed, letting the words settle deep in my chest. Blood ties had once defined me, a thread I thought I was obligated to follow no matter where it led. But now I knew better. Love could exist without control, and family could be chosen, not imposed. As I walked home that night, the air felt lighter, the city streets alive with possibility. Freedom, I realized, was my truest inheritance, and I intended to protect it with everything I had. Allison sat alone in her apartment, the city's hum a soft backdrop. The ordeal with her parents had carved a truth she couldn't unlearn. Independence was her greatest asset, hard-won through years of grit. Their betrayal, forged signatures, pawned heirlooms, demands for control revealed that family ties could bind rather than bond. She saw now how their neglect disguised as tough love had conditioned her to question her worth. But it also forged her resilience, teaching her to trust her own instincts over their narratives of guilt. Freedom, she realized, wasn't just financial, it was the courage to sever ties that demanded her surrender. Love didn't require ownership and loyalty, didn't mean sacrifice. By protecting her boundaries, she wasn't betraying family. She was honoring herself. The lesson stung, but it clarified her path. Build a life on her terms, choose connections that uplifted rather than exploited. As she locked her safe, securing her future, Allison vowed to carry this truth forward. Her strength was her own, and no one could claim it.
The lunch rush at Milano's was in full swing when my brother Marcus decided to make his announcement. I was expediting orders in the kitchen, ensuring each plate met our standards before heading to the dining room. The familiar sounds of sizzling pans, chopping knives, and busy conversation filled the space I'd grown to love over the past 3 years. Marcus had been the general manager for 8 months, ever since our parents convinced me to give him a chance to prove himself in the family business. What they didn't know was that Milano's wasn't the family business they assumed it was. When I bought the struggling restaurant through my LLC, Riverside Holdings, I'd kept the ownership structure quiet. My family saw me as the computer girl, who somehow talked her way into a restaurant job, not someone capable of running a successful business. Sarah. Marcus's voice cut through the kitchen noise. Front and center. Now. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked to the pass window. The dining room was packed with our usual Tuesday crowd: business people, families, regulars who'd become part of our extended community. Marcus stood in the center of it all, his chest puffed out like he was about to deliver a state address. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced loudly enough for the entire restaurant to hear, "I need to address a staffing issue that's been affecting your dining experience." My stomach dropped. Whatever was coming, it wasn't going to be good. "This is my sister Sarah," he continued, gesturing toward me with theatrical flair. "She's been working here as a line cook, but frankly she's not meeting our standards. The family charity program ends today." The dining room fell silent. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the kitchen staff behind me had gone quiet, everyone sensing the shift in atmosphere. "Marcus," I said quietly, "maybe we should discuss this privately." "No, I think transparency is important," he replied, his voice carrying that particular tone he'd perfected since childhood, the one that meant he was enjoying having power over me. "See, Sarah here has always been the family disappointment. Never could hold down a real job, so our parents asked me to help her out. But I'm running a business, not a charity." Mrs. Chin, one of our regular customers who came in every Tuesday with her book club, looked uncomfortable. The business lunch table in corner booth 6 had stopped their meeting entirely to stare. This was exactly the kind of scene that could damage Milano's reputation permanently. "You see," Marcus continued, warming to his audience, "Sarah thinks she understands the restaurant business because she can follow recipes. But management, strategy, customer service excellence? That requires real skills, real education, real experience. Things she's never had." He'd been building toward this moment for months. Every staff meeting where he'd dismiss my suggestions. Every time he'd introduce himself to vendors as the owner's son. Every decision he'd made without consultation, assuming his title as general manager meant he had ultimate authority. "So effective immediately," Marcus announced, pulling a termination letter from his pocket. "Sarah's employment here is terminated. We'll be hiring a qualified line cook who can actually contribute to our success." The dining room remained frozen. Our head server Miguel looked stricken. He'd been with me since day one, knew the real story, but understood why we kept the ownership structure quiet. Our family dynamics were complicated enough without adding business ownership to the mix. "You can't be serious," I said, though part of me wasn't surprised. Marcus had always been the golden child, the one with the business degree and the confident handshake. When our parents talked about success, they meant people like Marcus, loud, ambitious, quick to take credit. "Dead serious," he replied, extending the termination letter. "Pack your things and turn in your apron. Security will escort you out if necessary." I looked around the dining room at faces I'd come to know over 3 years. Mrs. Chen's book club, who always ordered our special pasta and left generous tips. The young couple in booth 2 who'd had their first date here and came back every month to celebrate their anniversary. The construction crew from the site across the street who trusted us with their limited lunch break time. These people weren't just customers to me. They were the reason I'd worked 16-hour days to turn Milano's from a failing restaurant with a 1-star Yelp rating into the neighborhood gem it had become. They were why I'd personally interviewed every staff member, why I'd spent months perfecting our menu, why I'd invested not just money but my heart into making this place something special. "Fine," I said quietly, untying my apron. "I'll pack my things." Marcus smirked, clearly pleased with himself. "Smart choice. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I walked back to the kitchen, past the prep stations I'd designed, past the equipment I'd carefully selected, past the staff schedule I'd spent hours optimizing to ensure everyone got fair hours and decent pay. My personal knife set went into my bag along with the few belongings I kept in the office. Miguel appeared at my elbow. "Sarah, this is crazy. You can't just let him." "It's okay," I said, though it definitely wasn't okay. Sometimes people need to learn things the hard way. As I gathered my things, I could hear Marcus in the dining room, already spinning the narrative to our customers. "Sometimes you have to make tough decisions to maintain quality. We'll have a new qualified chef by tomorrow." The kitchen staff watched me with confusion and anger. They knew who really ran this place, who approved their schedules, who fought for their raises, who stayed late to cover shifts when they had emergencies. But they also knew that speaking up could cost them their jobs, and most of them had families to support. I slung my bag over my shoulder and walked through the dining room one last time. The customers watched with uncomfortable expressions, sensing they'd witnessed something that didn't quite add up. Marcus stood near the register, arms crossed, looking satisfied with his public display of authority. "Good luck with everything," I said to him as I passed. "Won't need it," he replied. "Finally going to run this place properly." I pushed through the front door into the afternoon sunlight, my 3 years at Milano's officially over. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been fired from my own restaurant by someone who genuinely believed he had the authority to do it. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. Unknown number. "Hello. Ms. Rodriguez? This is Jennifer Walsh from First National Business Banking. I'm calling because we received some unusual activity alerts on your Milano's restaurant account. It appears someone attempted to access your business credit line without proper authorization. Also, one of your employees called claiming to be the owner and demanding access to your operational accounts. I wanted to verify this with you directly since you're listed as the sole account holder and business owner." I sat in my car watching through Milano's front windows as Marcus gestured animatedly to the remaining customers, probably explaining how much better things would be now. "That's very interesting," I said. "What exactly did this employee claim?" "He said he was Marcus Rodriguez, the owner, and that he needed to terminate your access to the account since you were no longer employed. He also requested immediate access to today's receipts and demanded we reverse your recent equipment purchases. When we asked for proper documentation, he became quite agitated." Through the window I could see Marcus on his phone, his confident expression shifting to confusion, then frustration. "Ms. Rodriguez? Are you there?" "Yes, I'm here. And no, Marcus Rodriguez is not the owner. He's the general manager, though as of today that may be changing. Could you send someone to the restaurant? I think there are some ownership clarifications that need to be made in person." "Absolutely. Our business relationship manager can be there within 30 minutes. We take unauthorized access attempts very seriously, especially when someone claims to own an account they don't have legal rights to." I hung up and sat in my car for a moment watching the restaurant I'd built from the ground up. 3 years ago, Milano's had been a failing dive with health code violations and a reputation for terrible food. I'd bought it for a fraction of its assessed value, spending months renovating, hiring the right staff, perfecting recipes, and building relationships with our community. My family never understood how I'd managed to talk my way into a restaurant job. They assumed I was just lucky that someone took pity on the family disappointment and gave me a chance. The reality that I'd identified an undervalued business opportunity, secured financing, navigated licensing requirements, and turned it into a profitable enterprise didn't fit their narrative of who I was supposed to be. Marcus had always been the successful one, the one with the MBA and the corporate job. When he got laid off 6 months ago, Our parents pressured me to help him out. Give your brother a chance, they'd said. He has real business experience. He could probably teach you a lot about running a restaurant properly. So I'd hired him as general manager, hoping that family loyalty would outweigh my reservations. For the first few months it had worked reasonably well. Marcus brought energy and ambition, and some of his corporate experience did translate to restaurant operations. But gradually his attitude shifted from gratitude to entitlement, from collaboration to control. He started introducing himself to vendors as the owner's son. He began making unilateral decisions about staffing and menu changes. He talked about his vision for the restaurant's future, as if I were just a temporary obstacle to his grand plans. And increasingly he treated me not as his employer, but as a subordinate who needed constant management and correction. My phone buzzed with a text from Miguel. He's freaking out. Bank called and he's screaming at everyone. What's happening? I typed back, don't worry. Everything's going to be fine. Just keep the kitchen running. 25 minutes later, a professional-looking woman in a navy suit entered Milano's. Through the front windows, I watched her approach Marcus, who was standing near the register looking increasingly agitated. She presented her business card and asked to speak with him privately. I could see Marcus's body language shift from confident to defensive to confused. His gestures became more animated, his voice louder, though I couldn't make out the words from my car. Other customers began glancing toward their conversation with obvious discomfort. The woman remained calm and professional, occasionally referring to a tablet in her hands. She was clearly explaining something that Marcus didn't want to hear, based on his increasingly frantic responses. My phone rang again. Marcus's number. Sarah, you need to get back here right now. His voice was tight with panic. There's some woman here from the bank making crazy accusations about ownership. She's saying you own Milano's, which is obviously impossible. You need to come back and clear this up. I'm sorry, but I don't work there anymore, I replied calmly. You fired me, remember? In front of the entire lunch rush. This isn't a joke. She's saying she's going to freeze the accounts until she can verify ownership with you. She's talking about calling corporate headquarters and legal departments. This could shut down the restaurant. Through the window I could see the banking representative talking to Miguel now, who was nodding and pointing toward the kitchen. Several customers had left money on their tables and were heading for the door, clearly uncomfortable with the drama unfolding in what was supposed to be their peaceful lunch spot. That does sound serious, I said. Maybe you should have thought about that before publicly humiliating me in front of our customers. Our customers? Sir, you're a line cook. You don't have customers. Actually, Marcus, I think you're about to learn something interesting about that. I hung up and got out of my car. Time to handle this properly. When I walked back into Milano's, the banking representative looked up from her conversation with Miguel and smiled with recognition. Ms. Rodriguez, thank you for coming. I'm Jennifer Walsh from First National. We spoke on the phone. Thank you for responding so quickly, Jennifer. I appreciate your diligence in protecting our business accounts. Marcus stared at us with growing confusion. Sarah, what is this woman talking about? Why is she calling you Rodriguez, like you're somebody important? Jennifer consulted her tablet. Mr. Marcus Rodriguez, I presume? You're listed in our system as an authorized employee for transaction processing, but not as an account holder or business owner. The account belongs entirely to Sarah Rodriguez, operating under the business entity Riverside Holdings LLC. The remaining customers had stopped pretending to eat and were openly watching our conversation. Mrs. Chen's book club had their phones out, probably texting their families about the drama unfolding at their usual lunch spot. That's impossible, Marcus said, his voice getting louder. This is a family restaurant. Our parents set this up. Sarah works in the kitchen. According to our records, Jennifer continued professionally. Ms. Sarah Rodriguez purchased Milano's restaurant 3 years ago through her LLC. She holds the business license, the liquor license, the lease agreements, and all operational accounts. You were added as an authorized general manager 8 months ago, with limited transaction privileges. I watched Marcus process this information. His face cycled through confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally, a dawning understanding of how badly he'd miscalculated. But, you don't know anything about business, he said to me, his voice smaller now. You work in the kitchen. I work everywhere, I replied. Because I own everything. Jennifer pulled out a document folder. I brought copies of the account agreements and business registration paperwork, since there seemed to be some confusion about authority levels. Ms. Rodriguez, you'll need to review the unauthorized access attempts and decide how you'd like to proceed. She handed me the folder and I glanced through the papers. Marcus had tried to access not just the daily receipts, but also our line of credit, vendor payment accounts, and payroll systems. If he'd succeeded, he could have done serious damage to our financial stability. Jennifer, I said, I think we need to make some changes to the authorized user list. Marcus stepped forward, panic clear in his voice now. Sir, wait. Let's talk about this privately. There's been a misunderstanding. The misunderstanding, I replied, was thinking you could fire me from my own restaurant. I turned to address the remaining customers, who deserved an explanation for the chaos they'd witnessed. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to your lunch. My name is Sarah Rodriguez and I'm the owner of Milano's. We've had some internal staffing issues that are being resolved. Miguel, our head server, will make sure everyone's meal is complimentary today, and I hope you'll give us another chance to provide the peaceful dining experience you come here for. Mrs. Chin raised her hand like she was in a classroom. Honey, are you the one who changed the menu 2 years ago to include those wonderful vegetarian options? Yes, ma'am. We wanted to make sure everyone in the community felt welcome here. And you're the one who stayed open during that snowstorm last winter so the construction workers could have somewhere warm to eat lunch? That's right. She nodded approvingly. Then you keep doing what you're doing. That young man's behavior was completely inappropriate. The construction crew leader from the corner table stood up. We've been coming here for 3 years. Food's been great, service is always good. We don't care about your family drama, but we do care about being treated with respect when we're trying to eat our lunch. Other customers murmured agreement. These were people who'd supported Milano's through our growth from struggling restaurant to neighborhood institution. They'd watched me expedite their orders, remembered their preferences, asked about their families. To them, I wasn't the family disappointment. I was the person who made their lunch hour a little better every day. Marcus stood in the middle of the dining room, his public display of authority having backfired completely. The confident speech about hiring qualified staff and running a real business now looked like exactly what it was, an uninformed power grab by someone who'd fundamentally misunderstood the situation. Ms. Rodriguez, Jennifer said, what would you like me to update in our system regarding Mr. Marcus Rodriguez's access levels? I looked at my brother who was staring at the floor with the deflated posture of someone whose entire worldview had just collapsed. Remove him from all accounts effective immediately, I said. And Jennifer? Thank you for protecting my business. Your diligence probably prevented some serious financial damage. She nodded and made notes on her tablet. We'll process these changes within the hour. Mr. Marcus Rodriguez, you'll need to return any business credit cards, account access codes, or financial documents in your possession. Marcus looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not anger, not dismissal, but genuine recognition that he'd made a catastrophic error in judgment. Sarah, he said quietly, I didn't know. Our parents said what they always say, I interrupted, that I'm the family disappointment who needs help from her successful brother. What they didn't know is that I bought this place 3 years ago when it was failing, turned it into a profitable business and created jobs for 15 people including you. The dining room remained silent, our family drama playing out in front of people who just wanted to eat their lunch in peace. I gave you a management position because family is important to me, I continued. I trusted you with significant responsibility and hoped you'd use it to learn the business, maybe eventually become a real partner. Instead, you used it to publicly humiliate me based on assumptions that were completely wrong. Marcus's shoulders sagged. What happens now? I looked around the dining room at Miguel waiting to clean up this mess, at Mrs. Chen's book club watching with fascinated concern, at the construction crew who'd lost part of their lunch break to family drama, at the business lunch table where people were checking their watches and clearly regretting their restaurant choice. Now you clean out your office, return all business materials, and think about whether public humiliation is really the best management strategy, I said. And I get back to work running my restaurant. Jennifer finished her paperwork and shook my hand. Ms. Rodriguez, We appreciate your business and apologize for the inconvenience. If you need any assistance with the account security updates, please don't hesitate to call. After she left, Marcus stood in the middle of the dining room looking lost. The confident general manager who'd fired me 30 minutes ago had been replaced by someone who clearly had no idea what to do next. "Sarah," he said, "I'm sorry. I really thought." "I know what you thought," I replied. "The same thing our whole family thinks. That success looks like an MBA and a corporate title, not like someone who quietly builds something from nothing. The problem is, you never bothered to find out what was actually happening here before you decided to take control." Miguel approached cautiously. "Boss, what do you need me to do?" "Make sure everyone gets taken care of," I said, tying my apron back on. "And let the kitchen staff know that the drama is over. We still have a restaurant to run." As I walked back toward the kitchen, Marcus called after me. "What should I tell our parents?" I stopped and turned around. "Tell them that their family disappointment owns a successful restaurant, employs 15 people, and just learned an important lesson about making assumptions. And Marcus, next time someone gives you a job, maybe try to understand the business before you decide to take it over." The lunch rush resumed its normal rhythm, though with an undercurrent of excited conversation about what customers had just witnessed. Mrs. Chen's book club was already planning to come back next week specifically to support the restaurant after the family drama. The construction crew left their usual generous tip and promised to spread the word that Milano's was still the best lunch spot in the neighborhood. By the time the afternoon shift arrived, Marcus had quietly cleaned out his office and left. Miguel found his keys and access cards on the desk, along with a handwritten note that simply said, "I'm sorry." That evening, as I closed up the restaurant I'd built from nothing, I reflected on the day's events. Marcus's public firing hadn't just been about asserting authority. It had been about a fundamental misunderstanding of who I was and what I was capable of achieving. Our family had always seen me as the one who needed help, not the one providing it. But Milano's success wasn't an accident or a lucky break. It was the result of 3 years of careful planning, hard work, financial risk-taking, and relationship building. The customers who defended me during Marcus's meltdown understood that, even if my own family didn't. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Marcus. Can we talk tomorrow? I think I have a lot to learn." I smiled and put the phone away. Tomorrow we could talk about lessons learned and whether second chances were possible. Tonight I had a successful restaurant to close up and plans to make for continued growth. Sometimes the family disappointment turns out to be the family success story. It just takes the right moment for everyone else to notice. The secure satellite phone rang at 3:17 a.m. Kabul time, cutting through the hum of classified servers in our forward operating base. I was deep in a financial intelligence briefing about Iranian sanctions violations when my encrypted device buzzed with the emergency family code. The timing couldn't have been worse. We were tracking a $50 million weapons procurement network, and I was scheduled to brief the Joint Chiefs in 6 hours. "Sarah, thank God you picked up." Karen's voice crackled through the encrypted connection, breathless with what sounded like excitement mixed with whine. "I have incredible news about your little house situation back home." I stepped away from the wall of monitors displaying terrorist funding flows and moved into the soundproof booth we used for personal calls. As a senior financial analyst for the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control, I spent my days unraveling the financial networks that funded everything from ISIS operations to North Korean missile programs. My family back in suburban Maryland thought I was some kind of glorified bookkeeper who processed routine paperwork. "What situation, Karen?" I asked, though my stomach was already tightening. Karen's definition of helping usually involved assuming she knew better than everyone else about their lives. "Don't play dumb with me, Sarah. We all know you're drowning with that mortgage on your pathetic government salary." I found the perfect solution. My blood chilled. The modest 3-bedroom colonial in Arlington had been my home for 8 years, purchased with a VA loan right after I graduated from Georgetown with my master's in international finance. What none of my family, understood was that when you hold a top-secret/SCI security clearance and work in financial intelligence, every asset you own gets registered with multiple federal security monitoring systems. The house wasn't just my residence. It was classified as a protected federal asset due to my clearance level, overseas assignments, and the sensitive nature of my work tracking international money laundering. "Karen, whatever you're thinking of doing, I already handled it. Her voice was triumphant, like she'd just solved world hunger. The paperwork is completely done. You're going to thank me when you're not lying awake stressed about money every night. What paperwork? I asked, though I was already pulling up my secure laptop to check my property monitoring alerts. The sale documents, obviously. I found a buyer willing to pay $300,000 cash for that little place. You can rent something actually affordable and finally live within your means instead of pretending you're successful. Identity theft. Wire fraud. Forgery. Fraudulent property transfer of a federally monitored asset. Each word she spoke was another federal felony that would trigger automatic investigation protocols from at least 4 different agencies. Karen, listen to me very carefully, I said, trying to keep my voice level while my fingers flew across the keyboard. You cannot sell my house. You don't have power of attorney and you don't understand what you're dealing with. She laughed, that same condescending sound she'd been making since we were kids, the one that said she always knew better than everyone around her. Sarah, sweetie, family helps family. I've had all your important documents since you asked me to collect your mail during your deployment. It wasn't exactly rocket science to figure out the signatures. The monitoring system was already flashing red alerts. Unauthorized access attempts on my property records, suspicious document filings, irregular signature patterns detected by federal authentication systems. Karen, what you're describing is federal identity theft and document forgery. You need to stop whatever process you've started immediately and call me back. Too late, little sister. Closing is tomorrow at 2 p.m. sharp. Consider it a family intervention. We're saving you from your own bad financial decisions. The line went dead. I stared at my encrypted phone, calculating time zones while pulling up secure communication channels. It was 6:30 p.m. back in Maryland, which meant Karen had spent her entire day completing whatever fraudulent documentation she'd prepared. I immediately initiated emergency protocols, contacting my security officer at Treasury, my clearance investigator at OPM, and the FBI liaison who handled federal employee security compromises. Within 2 hours, I had confirmation that unauthorized activity had been detected on my property records, banking information, and federal identity documents. Federal monitoring systems had flagged multiple suspicious transactions and document filings. Investigation protocols were automatically initiated across Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and Homeland Security's Identity Theft Task Force. The next morning, I was on the first available military transport back to Andrews Air Force Base. I walked into Mom and Dad's split-level house in Silver Spring 3 days later, my overseas deployment cut short by what was now being classified as a federal security incident. The scene that greeted me looked like some kind of celebration. Karen was holding court in the living room, surrounded by our parents, Uncle Mike, Aunt Linda, and my cousin Jennifer. Empty champagne bottles cluttered the coffee table alongside what appeared to be a spread of legal documents. Sarah. Mom jumped up from the couch, wrapping me in a hug that smelled like Chardonnay and her favorite vanilla perfume. Sweetheart, Karen told us all about the house sale. We're so proud of you for finally accepting help when you need it. Dad nodded approvingly from his worn leather recliner, gesturing with his beer bottle. It's about damn time you stopped being so stubborn about family support. Karen probably saved you from foreclosure and bankruptcy. Uncle Mike raised his bottle in a toast. To Karen for having the guts to do what needed to be done. I looked around the room at their smiling, slightly drunk faces. Karen sat cross-legged on the floor in front of the coffee table like she was conducting a business presentation, manila folders and legal documents spread out in front of her like she just closed the deal of the century. Sarah, sit down, she commanded, patting the couch cushion beside her. I want to walk you through exactly how I saved your financial future. I remained standing, noting the specific documents visible on the coffee table. Deed transfer forms, power of attorney documents, property sale agreements, bank routing authorizations, notarized signature affidavits. Each one bearing what appeared to be a forged version of my signature. Your boring government job can't afford this mortgage, Karen announced loudly, holding up what looked like fraudulent deed transfer documents like they were a trophy. I finally helped you be realistic about your actual financial situation. Everyone nodded enthusiastically, like she'd just delivered a TED Talk on personal finance. Cousin Jennifer leaned forward with wine-flushed cheeks. Karen spent weeks researching the real estate market and legal procedures. She even consulted with multiple attorneys about the best way to help you. Aunt Linda added, "Your sister has always had such good business sense. Thank goodness someone in this family understands money management." "You've always been terrible with finances, sweetheart," Mom said gently. "Remember when you were in college and kept overdrafting your account? Karen was the one who helped you budget back then too." I sat down calmly on the couch and folded my hands in my lap. "Karen, can you show me exactly what documents you've signed and filed?" Her eyes lit up like I'd asked to see her prized collection. She began spreading papers across the coffee table like playing cards, clearly proud of her organizational skills. "I started with a comprehensive property assessment," she explained, pulling out real estate listings. "Your little house was valued at $285,000 to $310,000, so I set the asking price at $300,000 for a quick sale. Property fraud involving a federally protected asset. Then I prepared the necessary legal documentation." She showed me power of attorney forms with my forged signature. "I had to establish legal authority to act on your behalf since you're always overseas with that job. Federal identity theft and fraudulent power of attorney documentation. I practiced your signature for 3 weeks," she said proudly, pulling out what appeared to be practice sheets with dozens of attempts at replicating my handwriting. "I used samples from birthday cards, Christmas thank you notes, even that lease you signed when you first moved in." The notary didn't question anything. Systematic forgery with premeditation and notary fraud. "The buyers were so grateful for a clean, fast transaction," Karen continued, showing me the purchase agreement. "The Hendersons, retired couple from Delaware. They're paying full asking price, all cash, no financing complications. They're already planning to move in this weekend. Wire fraud involving interstate commerce and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud." Dad leaned forward with interest. "Karen, where exactly is this money going? Sarah's going to need help managing that much cash." Karen's smile grew even wider. "I'm so glad you asked, Dad. I opened a special trust account to protect Sarah from her own spending habits." She showed me bank documents with my forged signature and stolen social security number. "The money will be distributed monthly, $1, $500 for rent, $500 for groceries, $300 for utilities. No more mortgage stress, no more living beyond her means. Federal banking fraud, unauthorized account creation, and ongoing financial identity theft with systematic control mechanisms." Uncle Mike nodded approvingly. "That's smart thinking. Government employees aren't known for their financial intelligence." Mom reached over and squeezed my hand. "Karen researched apartments for you too. There's a lovely 1-bedroom in Tacoma Park for $1,200 a month. Much more appropriate for your actual salary level." Jennifer pulled out printed apartment listings. We toured 3 different places. The one on Cedar Avenue has a nice kitchenette and shared laundry facilities. Perfect for a single government worker. I checked my secure watch. 2:22 p.m. If Karen was telling the truth about a 2 p.m. closing, the fraudulent transaction had been completed 22 minutes ago. Federal monitoring systems would have detected the unauthorized property transfer immediately and automatically triggered investigation protocols across multiple agencies. My encrypted phone buzzed with a priority message from my Treasury Security Officer. "Flash override. Federal response initiated. Multiple agencies coordinating. Cleanup crew en route to target location. Maintain operational security until contact." I looked up at my celebrating family, who were now passing around the fraudulent documents like they were examining a newborn baby. "Karen," I said quietly, "I need you to understand something very important about that house." "What's to understand?" she laughed, shuffling through her paperwork. "It was a financial burden you couldn't afford, and now it's not your problem anymore. The house isn't just my personal residence." Karen's smile faltered slightly. "What do you mean?" "It's a regular house in a regular neighborhood. When you work in financial intelligence with a top-secret security clearance, all of your assets are registered with federal monitoring systems. Any unauthorized activity involving those assets triggers automatic investigation protocols." The room got quieter, though Uncle Mike let out a skeptical chuckle. "Sarah, you work at some kind of government accounting office," he said. "Stop trying to make it sound so important. I pulled out my secure credentials wallet and set it on the coffee table next to Karen's fraudulent documents. My top-secret/SCI clearance card was visible through the clear plastic, along with my Treasury Department badge, diplomatic passport, and NATO security authorization. I'm a GS-14 senior financial analyst for Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, I said calmly. I track international money laundering for terrorist organizations, drug cartels, and sanctions violators. I spent the last 8 months in Afghanistan tracking ISIS funding networks and Iranian weapons procurement operations. Karen picked up my credentials wallet with shaking hands, studying the official seals and security features. These look. She started, then trailed off. Official. Because they are official. And the house you just illegally sold has been under federal security protection monitoring since I received my clearance 8 years ago. Dad's beer bottle paused halfway to his lips. Security protection monitoring? What the hell does that mean? It means any unauthorized transaction involving my property automatically triggers federal investigation protocols from multiple agencies. Wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, fraudulent notarization, banking fraud. Every crime committed in the process gets immediately flagged by federal monitoring systems and referred for prosecution. Mom's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the hardwood floor and sending Chardonnay splashing across the coffee table documents. Crimes, she whispered. Karen was helping you. Karen forged federal documents, committed systematic identity theft against a federal employee, and fraudulently transferred protected federal property. Each of those crimes carries mandatory minimum sentences. Aunt Linda was staring at my credentials like they might bite her. Sarah, please tell me you're exaggerating about your job importance. I make $164,000 a year base salary, plus overseas pay differentials, hazard pay, and security bonuses. Last year my total compensation was $287,000. The house has been completely paid off for 3 years. The room went dead silent except for the sound of Mom's broken glass crunching under Jennifer's shifting feet. Paid off. Dad's voice was barely audible. I live modestly for operational security reasons, not financial reasons. Federal employees with my clearance level can't display wealth or live ostentatiously. It creates security vulnerabilities and makes you a target for foreign intelligence services. Karen sank back into her sitting position on the floor, fraudulent documents scattered around her like fallen leaves. But, you always complained about bills when you called home. You drove that beat-up Honda for years. Operational security requires maintaining a low profile and operational cover. The Honda is armored and equipped with federal tracking systems, encrypted communications, and emergency beacon technology. Most of my real assets are held in classified trust accounts that can't be disclosed for security reasons. Uncle Mike's face had gone pale. Sarah, please tell me you're joking about federal crimes. I reported the security compromise to my federal security officer 3 days ago when Karen first called me in Afghanistan. Federal monitoring systems flagged the unauthorized activity on my property records yesterday morning. Investigation protocols activated automatically when the fraudulent transaction completed 22 minutes ago. A sharp, authoritative knock echoed from the front door. 3 precise raps, a pause, then 2 more raps, the federal law enforcement identification pattern. Everyone froze like deer in headlights. That's not a social visit, I said quietly, checking my secure phone for confirmation messages. Dad started to get up from his recliner, but I held up my hand. Please let me handle this. Everyone stay exactly where you are and keep your hands visible. I opened the front door to find 4 serious individuals in dark business suits. The lead agent held up her credentials in a black leather wallet. Agent Martinez, FBI Financial Crimes Division, she announced in a clear, professional voice. We're executing federal warrants for Karen Elizabeth Thompson in connection with wire fraud, identity theft, and fraudulent transfer of protected federal property. Behind her stood Agent Chin from Treasury's Criminal Investigation Division, Agent Rodriguez from the U.S. Attorney's Office, and Special Agent Williams from the Secret Service Financial Crimes Task Force. I stepped aside to allow them entry. The subject is in the living room with family members. All fraudulent documentation appears to be present on the coffee table. Agent Martinez stepped into the living room, taking in the scene of scattered documents, broken glass, and terrified faces. Which individual is Karen Elizabeth Thompson? Karen had gone completely white, frozen in her sitting position on the floor surrounded by incriminating evidence. I'm Karen, she whispered. Agent Chin was already photographing the documents on the coffee table with an evidence camera. We can see deed transfer forms, power of attorney documents, banking authorizations and property sale agreements, all bearing forged signatures of the protected individual. Agent Martinez addressed Karen directly. Ms. Thompson, you are under arrest for violations of federal wire fraud statutes, identity theft of a federal employee, forgery of federal documents, fraudulent banking transactions, and unauthorized transfer of protected federal property. Protected federal property? Mom asked in a shaky voice. Agent Rodriguez consulted his tablet while addressing the room professionally. When federal employees hold top-secret security clearances and work in sensitive financial intelligence roles, their personal assets receive special protection status under federal law. Any unauthorized activity involving those assets triggers immediate multi-agency investigation and prosecution. Special Agent Williams was collecting the fraudulent documents as evidence. We'll need to conduct individual interviews with everyone present regarding their knowledge of the criminal conspiracy and document forgery. Karen tried to stand on shaking legs. How much trouble am I in? I was just trying to help my sister with her financial problems. Agent Martinez consulted her enforcement tablet. Wire fraud involving amounts over $100,000 carries up to 20 years in federal prison. Identity theft of a federal employee carries a mandatory minimum of 15 years. Fraudulent transfer of protected federal property adds another 10 to 15 years. You're looking at 30 to 50 years in federal prison, plus restitution and federal court costs. Dad made a choking sound and collapsed back into his recliner. 50 years. Jennifer whispered. Agent Chin continued his documentation process. The Hendersons who purchased the property are also under federal investigation for conspiracy to commit fraud and receiving stolen property. Their $300,000 payment has been frozen as evidence and proceeds of federal crimes. The property transfer has been voided by federal court order. Uncle Mike found his voice, though it came out as a croak. What about the money Karen put in that trust account she set up? All accounts opened using stolen federal identity credentials have been frozen and seized as evidence, Agent Rodriguez explained. The funds will be held pending federal prosecution and restitution proceedings. Agent Martinez turned back to Karen. Ms. Thompson, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in federal court. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you by the Federal Public Defender's Office. As they continued reading Karen her Miranda rights and applied federal restraints, she looked at me with tears streaming down her face and mascara running. Sarah, please, she begged. I was honestly trying to help you. I thought you were struggling financially. I thought your job was just routine paperwork. I met her eyes calmly. Karen, you committed multiple federal felonies based on assumptions you never verified. You never asked about my actual financial situation or the nature of my work. But your job seemed so boring when you talked about it. Operational security requires that I can't discuss classified aspects of my work. When I say I process financial documents, I can't explain that those documents involve tracking terrorist funding networks and international weapons procurement. Agent Chin addressed my parents directly. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, you will be required to appear before a federal grand jury to testify about your knowledge of the fraudulent documents and criminal conspiracy. Mom burst into tears, her sobs echoing off the living room walls. We didn't know they were federal crimes. We honestly thought Karen was helping Sarah with financial problems. Ignorance of federal law is not a legal defense, Agent Martinez explained. However, full cooperation with the federal investigation may be considered by prosecutors during sentencing recommendations. They began escorting Karen toward the door in federal restraints, her hands cuffed behind her back with official federal marshal's equipment. She turned back one final time, desperation clear in her voice. Sarah, please, can't you call someone? Use your government connections to fix this somehow. I shook my head slowly. Karen, I am the government connection. And you committed crimes against federal monitoring systems that automatically trigger prosecution protocols. There is no fixing this through personal intervention. Agent Rodriguez handed me a federal evidence receipt and contact information. Ms. Thompson will need your cooperation with the ongoing investigation and prosecution. Your security officer has already been briefed on the incident resolution. As the federal agents drove away with my sister secured in the back of their vehicle, I looked around the living room at my family's shocked faces and the remaining evidence of Karen's criminal activity. "Sarah," Dad said quietly, his voice hoarse from shock. "How much money do you actually make in that government job?" "Enough to own my house outright, Dad. Enough to live comfortably without needing anyone's financial help or intervention." Mom wiped her streaming eyes with a tissue. "Why didn't you ever tell us about your real job?" "Because federal employees with top-secret security clearances are legally prohibited from discussing classified aspects of their work or revealing details that could compromise national security operations. It's actually a federal crime for me to disclose specific information about my position, clearance level, or operational assignments." Aunt Linda was still picking up pieces of broken wine glass with trembling hands. "What happens to Karen now?" "She'll be processed through the federal detention system, appear before a federal magistrate for arraignment, and face prosecution in U.S. District Court. Given the scope of the crimes and the federal mandatory minimums, she's likely looking at significant federal prison time." Uncle Mike slumped forward in his chair. "We completely screwed this up, didn't we? You supported and celebrated someone who was committing systematic federal crimes against a family member. Karen made the criminal choices, but everyone in this room encouraged and enabled her criminal activity." Jennifer spoke up quietly. "Sarah, we had no idea about your security clearance or your real job responsibilities. You had no idea because you never asked. You all assumed I was financially struggling and professionally unsuccessful based on surface appearances and operational security requirements." I gathered my credentials from the coffee table and headed toward the front door. "Sarah, wait," Mom called desperately. "Where are you going now?" "Back to my job. I have international terrorist funding networks to investigate, sanctions violations to prosecute, and classified briefings to prepare. National security work doesn't pause for family criminal activity." Dad struggled to his feet. Will we see you again after all this?" I paused with my hand on the doorknob. "That depends on whether this family can accept that your boring government employee daughter actually has her life together and knows what she's doing professionally and financially." "We're so sorry, sweetheart," Mom said through fresh tears. "We completely misjudged your situation." "You misjudged my situation because you made assumptions instead of asking questions. You decided I needed rescue instead of asking if I actually needed help." "What can we do to fix this?" Aunt Linda asked. "Hire Karen, the best federal defense attorney you can afford. She's going to need expert legal representation for multiple federal felony charges." "And what about us?" Dad asked. "The federal grand jury testimony? Tell the truth about what you knew and when you knew it. Cooperate fully with federal investigators. And maybe consider that government employees sometimes have more important jobs than you realize." I walked out to my armored Honda, the one they'd always mocked as a beat-up economy car, and drove back to my fully paid-off house in Arlington. My secure communication device showed 23 missed priority calls from Afghanistan, Germany, and Treasury headquarters. International financial crime investigations don't wait for family drama to resolve. 6 months later, Karen pled guilty to federal wire fraud, identity theft, and fraudulent transfer of protected federal property. She was sentenced to 4 years and 8 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. She was also ordered to pay $347,000 in restitution to the Hendersons and federal court costs. My parents sent a formal written apology through my federal security attorney, acknowledging their fundamental misunderstanding of my professional situation and financial status. They requested permission to visit me and rebuild our relationship after Karen's sentencing was complete. I declined through the same attorney. Some family relationships cannot survive the discovery that your boring government paperwork job actually involves protecting national security from international financial threats. Some assumptions about success and failure cannot be repaired after federal agents arrest your sister in handcuffs while she's surrounded by evidence of systematic criminal activity targeting you. But my house in Arlington remains secure, federally protected, and completely mortgage-free. International terrorist funding networks still require tracking and disruption. Iranian sanctions violations still need investigation and prosecution. The work continues at the highest levels of national security. The federal protection remains comprehensive and automatic. And sometimes, the most boring-seeming government jobs turn out to be more critical to national security than anyone in your family ever imagined. Federal service means something. Federal protection means something. And federal justice, when you commit crimes against both, means serious consequences that family relationships cannot survive.